Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about the various Albions that I have owned and some thoughts and musings about them. And so this is a talky head video. There's not really going to be anything other than this dumb face and some photos and stuff like that. And so if you're not interested, then now is a great time to tune out. But if you are, then the point here is I get asked a lot about which Albions that I've owned, what do I like about them, what don't I, why did I keep things, and so I thought it would be just worthwhile to make a video and answer this question. So I will talk about the Albions that I've owned first. I'll go through the laundry list, then I'll talk about the ones I've got some cursory experience with, which ones I lust after and would like to add to my collection or get some hands-on time with, and then that's it. But before I do any of that, I do want to point out that all of them are good. That's the short answer, probably what you're getting from a whole bunch of these various reviews. There's not really a bad sword that they make. At least if you're buying a sword and you're aware of what its characteristics are and that's a thing that you want, you're probably going to be happy with it. They generally make very good things, and so, well, I am going to be very negative in this video because it's going to focus on the reason that I sold things, so naturally it's going to... I have a long list of things that I've owned. It's been drastically reduced. That doesn't mean any of them are bad. It just means I moved on from them. They weren't for me. I chose to do other things. And I also don't study historic European martial arts, so anything that I keep is just a fun object for me. It's a wall hanger, a thing that I like to go in the backyard and cut with from time to time. So it's important to preface that none of them are bad. So if you hear me prattle on about things that are negative, you are welcome to disagree. They're not bad, and I could be wrong. That's the point. Anyway, on with the list. All right, this is in a quasi-alphabetical order. The first one is the Acre, or Acre, I think it's Acre, but more or less this is like a first-generation sword from Albion, one that they made prior to the next generation line, which is what people are most familiar with, so this very early days of Albion. Now, these lack refinement, or lack some of the refinement and design elements that Peter Johnston and, well, that Albion grew up into, but it doesn't make them bad swords. They're still pretty cool. There's a number of kind of like original generation Albions out there. The Acre, as what I'm going to call it, has been one of them. I didn't mind it. It was a fun sword, but it lacked, again, some of the refinement, and so I have had the opportunity to move it along. Again, European arms are one of those things that I don't particularly study how to use, so if it isn't something that just is like a jewel that I want to hang on my wall and look at, or something that is monumentally fun to move around and cut with, then it tends to find its way out of my collection. And I've made a few mistakes in that realm as well. I've come to grow and regret some things that I've sold, but I digress. The Acre wasn't one of them. It was an early sword. If you find one secondhand, well, hell, if you find any of these secondhand at a good price, they're all worth buying. This is one that might be easily overlooked as a sword from a different maker. The next one is the Albion Alexandria, and this is one that I don't particularly regret selling because I couldn't ever quite get the grip to feel good. And I understand that it's a little bit more historically based on the Harriet Dean sword versus the Principe, which is one that I haven't owned and would, spoiler for what I've lusted after. But the Principe has a handle that I think would be a little more ergonomic for me personally. And the Albion Alexandria, well, it looks fantastic and feels great in the hand, just never really quite felt as spectacular as it looked to me. And I owned a couple of them, and I compared them to other Type C swords, but there was a custom variety of a Type C sword, 18C sword, I should say, that was similar to the Alexandria, but had a fishtail type pommel on it, and it was just so fantastic. And so that kind of made me think I should probably sell this. It looks right with a wheel pommel, but it just doesn't feel fantastic in my hand. And wheel pommels are one of the driving forces behind why I tend to sell things. And I understand that if you study historic arts, that wheel pommels were common in the time and they fit with the type of art that you sell, but I don't study any of that, and so they just have to feel nice in my hand, and wheel pommels generally don't. I digress. Point is, the Alexandria was a fantastic sword. If you want a Type 18C sword and you want it to be a little more historic, this is a great sword. They feel wonderful. I've got a review on it. Check it out if you're so. There's probably a review on most of these, but it seems like the Principe addresses most of the critiques that I would have around usability, and so if that bothers you, then I would go with the Principe, despite the fact that I don't have a review on one and can't give you any first-hand experience about it. Next up is the Albion Baron, and this is one that I really don't remember very much. I had one, I have photos of it, but I don't remember owning it. I don't remember swinging it around. I can't recollect much about it, other than it must not have left a very big impression or a very good impression, because I can't recall much of anything about moving it around, or the reason I didn't like it, which was probably because it is a wheel pommel and it's heavy, and I have other swords that are longer and less heavy, or heavier swords that are more mobile, and so this one just didn't stick with me as one that was particularly interesting. But it's one that I had very early in my in my experience as a sword collector before I was doing a lot of reviews, and thus there is no review, no written recount of the thoughts and musings that I had about it. But I can say that it just didn't really resonate with me, and that was one of the reasons that I passed it along. Now, in contrast to the Baron, the Caithness is one that I've owned, and the example that I had was a dull variety of sword. Now, it was made to be dull. It wasn't that it came dull and I'm complaining about it, but I ended up selling it, I think, primarily because of that. I just didn't have a reason to keep one around. I like to cut with the swords, but a lot of the other bits and bobs around the sword were really quite nice. It was agile in the hand, as I recall. It didn't bite into my hand too much. It had a different kind of look to it that looked a little zazzier than average. And so most of what I feel about the Caithness was that I liked it and would have kept it had it been sharp, but I'm not exactly sure. I do recall it being agile and fun to move around, though. The downside was, again, I cut with the swords. I like to hang them around, and it wasn't so pretty that it was something I wanted to keep around as jewelry, but it did have something of a different look to it, and I certainly appreciated that much about it. Now, here's the first one on the list that I've actually kept, and that is the Conan the Barbarian Atlantian sword, and it is the dumbest, most awesome sword there ever was. I haven't done a review on it. I'll do it someday, maybe on the 40th anniversary of Conan or something, but it's a fantastic sword, but also awful if you want to use it as a sword. It's made for a barbarian, which I am not. I am just chubby. The barbarian sword has a quasi-round handle. It's very hard to index. The handle doesn't let you get two hands on it well. The pommel's too big to grab, and if you grab it, and if you hit anything with it, the nodes are placed in such a way where it wants to wiggle out of your hand. And you've heard about the renowned heaviness of the sword. As a sword, it's awful, but it's so cool at the same time. So this is one that I've hung on to, one that I intend to review someday, but I just haven't gotten to it, and thus it remains in the box in my collection. But I do take it out and handle it from time to time. It's one certainly of the coolest swords in my collection. And if you are a fan of the Conan series, this is just that, what can I say that you don't already know about it? It's a cool-ass sword and an icon of things that got people into swords, me included. Moving on to one that I have had many times and parted with every time, and that is the Crecy. Now, this is a favorite of a number of people, and I can see why people like it, but to me, the little nubby handle, the wheel pommel, it just didn't fit together, and it doesn't do any of the work for you either. You have to work to get your cuts. Some people see that as a pro. For me, at the time, I did not. Now, I've had some of these that had the most questionable build quality that I've seen on an Albion one just seemed to be a little wonky-ish. Still a fantastic sword by any measure, but for Albion standards, was just below the cut a little bit. At the same time, I've also had one that was, almost changed my mind about the Crecy, and it had the spiral grip on it, and it felt, as far as Crecys go, fantastic. If I had had the spiral grip one the first time, I might not have had a sour opinion on the Crecy in general. I believe I've also had an earlier generation of them, but I've had about 4 of these Crecy swords, and each time I wasn't particularly sad to part with it. The spiral grip one, though, certainly made me rethink things, and if you happen to get one or you're ordering a Crecy, then it doesn't look as glamorous and it costs a little bit more money, but that spiral grip, it just makes you feel so connected to the hand. And it's an option, I think, on any of the Albion swords. I've talked about this, I think, in a few videos, but that spiral grip just doesn't seem to get as much attention as I think it should. It's a special kind of grip option offered by Albion. You don't see it replicated very many places, and it absolutely makes a difference. A lot of the swords that I've had that I've really enjoyed and had this great tactile sensation on from Albion have had that grip, and while it lacks some of the refinement and edges that you might see on some of the more bedazzled swords, if you want to feel connected to the sword, if you want it to feel like an extension of your arm, then that is one pro tip to add to your sword purchase that you will likely not regret. The Knight. This is one that I still have in my collection. I will get to reviewing it, and then I will get to selling it, because I don't particularly like it. It's basically the same light little agile thing as the Caithness, but it seems just typical, and it has a wheel pommel, and I don't particularly like it. It looks neat, don't get me wrong. It's not an ugly thing, but it just doesn't do much for me other than be a nice Albion and be nimble and mobile. But if I have to have a sword that is not if I have to, boohoo for me, have to have a sword. I'm only going to keep a certain number of arming swords around, and the Knight just doesn't happen to be one of them. There's a few that I really like for jewelry, which we'll talk about, and there's another one that I happen to like that even has a wheel pommel that I happen to like moving around. So it just doesn't make the cut in terms of ones that I would like to keep in the collection. Next up is the Fiore, and this is a Type 15A, and one that I've had a few derivatives of, or ones like this, where there's a wider blade, which I'll talk about in a moment, but then this thinner blade that happens to be on the Fiore and the Ringek and the and a few others. Anyway, I didn't really like it. It's not that it's a bad thing, but again, you'll see the tried and true reasons that I tend to part with things. There's a wheel pommel on there. I like the way it felt, but the Fiore has this relatively thick, long, and rigid blade, and it's not particularly fantastic for cutting, but it's great for poking, and if you put a nice edge on it, it certainly can cut. But to me, it just didn't feel as elegant in the hand as another 15A sword of a different variety, and that's the one I opted to keep of this kind of type, though admittedly, I'll talk about it in a minute. It's the Mercenary. They feel very different. I happen to like the Mercenary more, and I'll talk about that when I get to it. But the Fiore and the others like it have this kind of stout presence in the hand, which I imagine feels good if you practice with it, but I don't. I just want a sword when I pick it up for me to go, wow, the Fiore didn't do that. It felt stouter in the hand, and it felt like if I trained with it, I could get really effective at poking things with it, but I didn't want to do that. And so it is one as well that I parted with. The Maximilian, this is one that was recently done in a review and one that I have recently parted with. I have sold it, I haven't shipped it off just yet, but I did sell my Maximilian. And the basic gist is, I talked about all the reasons in that video that I preferred the Tyroleen over the Maximilian, and I'll talk about the Tyroleen in a moment. But the Maximilian, it's a beautiful sword. It's awesome, it's big, and I don't really like moving the big swords around. Somebody equated big swords to me in a comment on YouTube pretty well, and it's that it doesn't feel like an extension of your arms because you have to have two of them on there. It's more like a dancing partner. And I thought that spoke to me. It resonated with me about how to think about moving it around. But the basic gist is I have a couple of them. I'm only going to keep one, and I want to hang on to the one that I have, well, that I feel in more control of. And while the Maximilian is absolutely the prettier of the two, it just doesn't feel as good in my hand as the Tyroleen. So the Maximilian is one that I've elected to part with. They are big swords, and frankly, I don't think I'm ever going to train with either of them because moving them around is cumbersome and weird, and I don't like doing it, and anyway, that's the basic gist, but I can't deny that it is an imposing, awesome, beautiful looking sword. It's just, I'm not the guy who moves it around. I'm not the guy. I'm not the guy for the sword, and which you could probably very plainly see in the video I made. Next is the Mercenary. Now this is one that I've had two examples of. I had one with a half wire grip and I had one without, and it's also a special one for me. It's one of my favorite swords. Different sword from Matt Hall from Everything Medieval, or Matt's Great Hall. I can't remember the name of his channel. He made a scabbard for me. It's an awesome sword with a lot of good memories, and so the Mercenary is one that I will not be parting with at any time. I really like the way it feels. It makes me think about thrusting quite a bit more, but it also can effectively cut, particularly if you put an edge on it. It just feels great in one hand or two. It doesn't have a wheel pommel on it. It has kind of that scent stopper faceted pommel. It looks beautiful. It has a cool, I don't know, everything about it is awesome, and it's filled with sentimentality for me as well, and so that's the reason I hang on to the Mercenary. Now, I had one with a half wire grip and I had one without, and I parted with the half wire grip. It's hard to keep clean. It doesn't feel as good in the hand to me. It looks awesome, but it doesn't feel as good. And the only thing that I would change about the Mercenary would be to order it with a spiral grip. I think that would be an iteration. If I had the spiral grip on it that I've mentioned before, then that might be the Mercenary that I kept. But I preferred the kind of leather wrapped handle that you typically see on a number of Albions on the Mercenary that I kept, and I have no regrets. It's a fantastic feeling sword. You don't have to be particularly smart or study European style martial arts to appreciate it. It's a little bit more geared toward the thrust than the chop, but at the same time it can do either of them reasonably effectively, though admittedly more pokey than choppy. Anyway, I love the way it feels. It looks really cool as well, and so that's one of the reasons, apart from it just being sentimental and having a cool scabbard and stuff with it. I can't even think about parting with it. It's such a cool sword, unless I have two of them, in which case I parted with one. The next is the Sabutai. Now this is a piece from Conan the Barbarian. It's Sabutai is one of the characters in the show, and this is a very small sword, but it is again very stout, very Conan-esque. It is way too heavy to be the size that it is, and it doesn't have the same following as the rest of the Conan swords. So this one is pretty early. I think I have like number 4 made. It's actually got Jody's signature on the certificate of authenticity. I think it's not like a reprint or something like that. Anyway, an obscure sword that you probably, when I review the Conan one, I'll probably feature some of the other Conan pieces that I have, but the Sabutai is one that I have as well. The Sempach. Now, this is one that I am hanging on to. I like this sword. I thought it was stupid looking, admittedly. I saw this sword and then it came up at a reasonable price and I thought I'd buy it and review it and then sell it. but I don't want to do that because I really like the way it feels. Now, it doesn't cut particularly well, but it thrusts reasonably well, and it's got a unique geometry and some fullers and some complex, cool stuff going on with it that just makes me think it's really neat. It has a fishtail style pommel on it. It feels great in my hand, and it's a lovely sword. I didn't expect to like the way it feels so much, even though I can't really cut with it effectively. I can't cut with the mercenary effectively either, frankly, but the Sempach has just, I don't know, it makes me think about how to move swords, and I also really like the way it feels, and I've grown to really like the way it looks. And I can't say I liked any of those things by looking at the picture. Looking at the photo on Albion's website, for some reason it just looked like a kind of stupid, simple, so I don't know, it just didn't look as good. I didn't expect to like it as much, which is one of those things that happens to you sometimes with swords. You can get one, you can pick it up, and then think, you know, it's not really my style, but let me pick it up, let me feel. And then all of a sudden, like, something goes off in your head, or some like explosion in your brain happens, and you're like, this feels just right. And the Sempach is one of those kind of swords that just feels excellent in the hand. So this is one that I, like I said, didn't expect to like, but really, really did enjoy. Next is the Sheriff, and the Sheriff is a Type 14 sword. I love the way these style swords look, and I've had just about every iteration that Albion makes of the Type 14 arming sword, and there's one that I kept and it wasn't the Sheriff. But the Sheriff was a really good feeling sword. I had no complaints about the way it felt. I liked it in terms of feeling more than the one that I kept, though I think I did like the Yoman a little bit more. But the Sheriff was a very solid feeling sword in the hand. It was a little bit more dynamic, a little bit easier to move, a little bit easier to cut with, frankly, than the Sovereign, which is the one that I kept. I'll talk about that. But more or less, it was a nice sword. It just, I only wanted to keep one Type 14, and it wasn't as pretty as the other ones, even though it moved better. This is something that I really struggled with, because I usually keep the ones that I like the feeling of, not the ones that I like the look of. And the Sovereign's just so damn pretty. It didn't work out this way that time. Didn't work out that way that time. You get what I mean. The Soldat. Now, this is a messer from Albion, and it is not up to, I think, their normal standard. I used a left-handed variety because that was what was on loan to me from sword friend Ian, who graciously lent me this one. And I think some of the wood on the sword, even though it was not in brand new condition, it was not a safe queen, it was used. I think some of the gaps and stuff just didn't resonate with me with the expectations that I have from Albion, and the woodwork seemed a little bit off, at least given the price point. And I also thought that it lacked some complex fullering, some extra zazz in the design. It's not an ugly sword, it wasn't bad, it was light and lively and easy to move around, and there was a lot of endearing things about it. If you pick one up, it's certainly going to be something that you enjoy. But I found myself really struggling between something like this or something, granted, a little more rugged looking in the Lance Connect Emporium line, and I think I like the Lance Connect Emporium one a little bit more for the messer side of things. I like the way they feel a little bit more, I like the geometry more, and you have to sacrifice some of that elegant refinedness that you get in an Albion, but I thought that was a little lacking in the example that I saw anyway. Now, it wasn't mine to get rid of, but I think I would have if I had had the Albion. If I had a Lance Connect Emporium messer and a Albion messer of the same general style, I think I'd hang on to the Lance Connect Emporium one. Anyway, that's my thought on the messer variety, but it still was a really nice sword and very fun to cut with. The Sovereign. This is one of the prettiest swords ever. It's so pretty. It reminds me of the Sword in the Stone sword, even though it's very different looking. It just reminds me of that sword that inspired me when I was a kid, even though it looks different. Granted, I know it's not the same, but it strikes a chord with me in my mind. I think it's a very, very elegant design overall, and that's why I just hang on to it. Now, the thing is, I don't like the way the Sovereign feels. I don't like the way it moves. I don't like cutting with it. It's not fun. It's hard to start. It's hard to stop. And while it's pretty, you kind of pay the price. That wheel pommel doesn't feel great in my hand. As a moving sword, I don't like it, but as wall art, I just can't not have it on my wall. And every time I walk past it, I look at it and admire it, and it is just one of the most beautiful swords Albion has done. The double fuller running down, how they just all of it. Now, I would have preferred, frankly, if I go back and I didn't buy this one secondhand and I ordered a new Sovereign from Albion, I would get a spiral grip on it. Rather than the grip on it. Despite the fact I really like the proportions and how it all comes out, I would probably get a spiral grip, and I get blackened furniture, and I get a blackened pommel instead of a bronze one. Now, the steel and red and kind of brass or bronze pommel look great. It's got its own style, but I like the all blacked out looking one, and I think that would even be more zazzy. And that blade is really what I find the shape and the blade and how it all lines up. The hilt, I'm not as... I think there's opportunity for improvement. That's exactly what I would do if I changed anything, and maybe I would even like the way it moves a little bit, because that that spiral grip, right? Anyway, the Sovereign. It's a beautiful sword. If you want wall art, great, but I can't say I particularly enjoy moving it around in contrast to the other Type 14s that Albion has put out. The Squire is the next one, and it's not to be confused with the Squire line swords that Albion makes, which are kind of their less expensive variety. This is the Squire. It's an arming sword, and it's a mix between a cut and thrust sword, and it does a beautiful dance between those two things. It also has a wheel pommel that I actually don't mind hanging on to. For some reason, the wheel pommel on the Squire doesn't bite into my hand. It doesn't irritate me. Now, I would still like it if it didn't have it, but if I have to have a wheel pommel, this is one that I can't say that I mind. If I move it around, it feels like it has a big enough, wide enough blade to do some really excellent cutting, and it also has a tip on it that feels like it'll penetrate really deeply, and I think it dances between cut and thrust in a way that really works well for me. So this is one that I like to hang on to. It's a beautiful sword. I like the way it looks. I like the way it moves. I like the way it cuts, and I will review it one day, I promise. The next one is the Steward, and this is one that I bought on eBay a while ago. It was secondhand, and I saw it up for a good price, and I snagged it. And I feel really blessed to do that because Albions rarely come up secondhand, and when they do, they often don't go for a good price. So I feel pretty fortunate to have snagged it. But at the same time, I can't tell you that I particularly enjoy it. And for no honest reason that it feels fine in the hand, it moves well, it cuts well, it thrusts, and it's pretty, and all of those things at the same time. If I hold swords in similar proportion, some of them resonate more with me, or just, I don't know, make me feel like I'd be more capable moving it around than I do with this one. So I imagine with training, which I'm not going to do, that feeling might change, and my opinions might change by the time I get around to actually reviewing it, which will probably be a while. But I digress. The point is, it is a nice sword. All of them are, but this one is one that I will likely part with when I'm done with the review. Now, speaking of swords that I have sold and then afterwards regretted, and particularly after some thought regretted, the Svante is one of them. So I had this a while ago, and it was just so expensive. It's such an expensive sword, but it moves around so well. And as I think back on swords that just had a special feeling to them in the hand, the Svante was absolutely one of them. So I had it, I moved it, I cut with it, I sold it, and I got my money back out of it, and I made some cool content with it. But it is got all the things that I like in a sword. Now, I could do without the little kind of esquilin thing, and I know I understand it's a museum line, and that's what the original had, but the way it felt otherwise was absolutely fantastic. It has some complex geometry going on, some cool blade shape. It has a long pommel, an interesting faceted, knot wheel pommel on it. It has all the things that tend to resonate with me in terms of a very feature-rich, unique-looking sword that feels awesome in the hand, and that was absolutely the Svante. And I think I've seen examples of them that were bedazzled and had scabbards made for them that really brought the package and elevated it up to something that would probably have hung on my wall and needed to stay there forever, based on like putting little gold effigies in the recesses in the pommel and making a scabbard that it befits a $4,000 sword. So basically it feels really great, and as I think back, I don't regret getting the money out of it because it allowed me to buy and do other cool sword stuff, and it allowed me to to have other things where I would otherwise have had to say no. At the same time, that's one that I really remember liking the feeling of. And if I had sharpened it and known what I know now, I think my review probably would have changed a little bit. It probably would have cut better. It probably would have been more fun. I probably would have appreciated some of the other things that the sword had on offer that I really didn't get at the time. So that's one that I do regret and wish that I could spend a little bit more time with, because, yeah, that was a special one. Now on to one that's a little bit of a conundrum, the Tallhoffer. Now this has all of the makings for a sword that I would like. It doesn't have that wheel pommel on it. It's got the little bulb on the back of it. It moved around really well, and if I was to keep any Type 15A sword that was not a mercenary, the Tallhoffer would be in a strong running. I liked the way it felt overall. It, again, had the same kind of blade as the Ringek, the Fiore, the Tallhoffer. I think there's one other one in there, and it's rigid. And so the basic gist is I was going to keep one Type 15A, and I kept the mercenary. And they're very different feeling swords, granted, but I like to cut with the sword. These don't cut particularly well. I don't wear them around as garb or really do anything else with them. So if it's not fun to move around, which I can't say this was, despite the fact that the pommel doesn't bite me and I like the way that felt, I can't say that I just liked moving it around as much as the mercenary. And so granted, they're very different swords, but I felt I would hang on to the mercenary, part with the Tallhoffer, because I know I have a lot of swords, but I can't keep them all. And if I don't love it, which I didn't think I did with the Tallhoffer, I thought I'd move it along. But this was a little tougher. I would say that I did like it more than others, but I ended up parting with it. Next is the Tyroleen. Now, this is one that I mentioned before with the Albion Maximilian. I like the Tyroleen more. It's got a doorknob on the bottom. I can grab it and I can move it around. The grip is a little fat in some spots. That's the one thing I don't like about it, but I might send it to Albion and have that spiral grip done. Anyway, if I have to, I don't have to, but I'm only going to hang on to one of these really large two-handed greatswords from Albion, and the Tyroleen is one that I feel a little bit more connected to, that I can move it around a little bit easier. I like the doorknob and how it moves in my hand. If I have to have a dancing partner that is a 5-pound greatsword, then this is the one I'm going to hang on to between the Maximilian and the Tyroleen. And it's really, as much as I like the Maximilian and as pretty as I acknowledge it is, it's not so pretty that I wouldn't choose practicality and maneuverability over it, which is why the Tyroleen is sticking around. Coming towards the end here, we have the Valeria. Again, a Conan the Barbarian type sword. I will get around to reviewing it. I'll feature it in the video with Conan. It's heavy if you're thinking about getting one and thinking the Valeria sword was a female protagonist and, that it might be lighter. It's not. It's awful to move around, but it is a lovely looking sword and pretty cool on the grand scale. And Jody Sampson really had some awesome designs. Whoever designed them did a fantastic job. And anyway, it's a beautiful sword. I'll review it one day. It's not today. Still got a round handle. Still terrible sword, just awesome looking. Totally fits in the Conan universe. Anyway, if you know the movie and it influenced you in any way, there's not much I can say about this sword that you're going to like or not like. It doesn't matter that it doesn't work well as a sword or that it's too heavy. It's still one of the coolest things ever. I'm kind of in that camp, even though I do recognize the lack of practicality and functionality the sword has. Last on the list of swords from Albion that I've owned and spent any amount of time with is the Yoman. And again, this is a Type 14. I had the Sheriff, I had the Yoman, I had the Sovereign, I kept the Sovereign. The Yoman was, I think, actually my favorite feeling of them. It might have been the Sheriff. But the Sheriff and the Yoman both felt really good. I kept the Sovereign, though, because it was the prettiest. And I liked the Yoman and the Sheriff more to move around than I did the Sovereign. But like I said, the Sovereign was just so pretty, so I sold the Yoman, sold the Sheriff. I can't say that I regret it, though. I don't know that I've had a Type 14 in my hand that I liked the feel of. There was the hollow ground version from Arms and Armor, which is like the Henry VIII sword, Henry V. Anyway, one of their swords, the hollow ground version, I picked it up while I was at their shop. Didn't spend a lot of time with it, but I actually liked the way it felt, I think. But generally speaking, I can't say that I've had a Type 14 arming sword that I've liked the feel of in my hand. So I might as well like the look of it, and the Sovereign certainly takes the cake there. But not a bad sword. Liked it more in terms of moving. If you're thinking about getting a Type 14, I would, for what my very novice, uneducated opinion is worth, the Yeoman and the Sheriff are better feeling. And so if you're not in love with the look of the Sovereign, then there you go. And the reason was the Sovereign just feels heavier. It's harder to start, harder to stop, harder to recover with. It feels less controllable overall, and that was really the reason. Then the pommel's bigger and bites into my hand more. So those are the things. Maybe you like those things, and if you do, then maybe you'll like the Sovereign for more than just its looks. I know when I talk to it, sometimes it wishes I liked it for more than just, no, it doesn't. I don't talk to the swords. Anyway, that completes the babbles about the Albions that I've owned and spent a lot of time with, and I may have missed some, but that's the ones that I can find photos of and recollect on and find in my YouTube history. So on to the swords that I have handled a little bit and also really enjoyed because I've spent some amount of time with them, but I haven't owned them. So the time I spent with them has been quite a bit different. So the Chieftain, I handled it at a show. I handled it quite a while, so not a lot of time, but probably more than Mike was comfortable with. Anyway, it felt surprisingly good in the hand. I thought it was going to be a big, clumsy, oafy sword. It was not. The Munich is also one. It feels amazing in the hand. I really, really loved the way that sword felt, but I did not buy it. Anyway, I handled the Munich at a show. I thought it was graceful. It was like, it felt very, very easy to move around. Not the sword that I generally tend to gravitate to, but I'd be very tempted to buy one because it felt amazing in the hand. The Vigil is another one. Well, I went to Albion's shop and had a tour and looked around. They had some stuff on the wall. The Vigil was one of them, and I was surprised at how much I liked the Vigil. And actually, the Oakshot is another one that I handled and spent a lot of time with as an arming sword. I don't generally gravitate towards either of those, but the Vigil felt like something that I could easily control and cut with, and the Oakshot felt like very maneuverable but also robust. And if I were fighting people without armor, the Vigil seems like a mini Type 18C. It feels like it'd be a very, very effective cutter, very easy to move around, very controllable, and very effective in the cut. The Oakshot felt like if I'm fighting people in armor, if I need to move things around and have a very durable sword that can also cut, the Oakshot had this geometry that looked kind of cool and more substantial and robust in kind of a weird, unique way. But it made me feel like it was a substantial thing. Even though I could move it, I could get the point where I needed to and then maybe like move a spear out of the way or something. Anyway, it felt like a awesome sword to do that with, but was also really surprising in terms of how cool it felt. The other one was the Dane, and I want to say that I held this either at Albion shop or at the table they had at a show once, but more or less I thought that this would be a big, dumb, heavy, stupid sword, and it was not. It was surprisingly agile, and it was more agile than the Maximilian. Now, I haven't spent as much time with the Dane as I did the Maximilian, but the Dane feels like one that I might actually want to hang on to. The Maximilian is different, but the Dane, not that you can move it like any other sword, but it does have a nimbleness to it that is kind of more than what you might expect for a sword of its size. All right, sword friends, those are my thoughts and musings on the ones I've spent some amount of time with that left an impression on me. But keep in mind, it's just that. It's just an impression on me. It might not be the same for you. Now, it's enough for me to go out of my way and maybe look for one of those secondhand, or if I see one come up, you know, pay a little bit extra to get one, because I know that I like the feeling of the sword. But there's no guarantee that you're going to feel the same way that I do. And again, I don't know why I'm dragging myself down here. If I own a thing, I feel like I can offer something to you around how does it feel, how does it move, what are your thoughts on it. But handling something and being impressed by it at a show, at a club, at a tournament, from a friend is just that. It's just a brief opinion about a thing. So keep the last ones with that very specific context in mind. But I also said I would talk about the ones that I lust after, that I'd really like to check out, that I haven't gotten to spend a lot of time handling. And the first and foremost on that list is the Regent. Now, I really like the way this sword looks. I like it with a half-wire grip. I bet I'd like it more with a spiral grip, but I digress. I would like the way the Regent feels. I like the pommel on it. I don't know if I'd like moving it around or not. It seems similar to a few pommels that I've held on Ronin katanas, albeit probably different and crisper, but it's going to be interesting to see if I can eventually get one, how it actually feels in the hand when it's properly executed and whatnot. Anyway. The blade type looks really cool. I bet I would like that sword. I think it's very handsome. The Viceroy is another one, and maybe even more than the Regent. It has a pommel that isn't quite a wheel pommel. It has kind of some special fullering in the blade that looks really, really awesome. And it has a blade type that looks like it can point and penetrate really well, but it also looks like it would cut reasonably well. So that's one that has a lot of features on it that I find particularly exciting, and I think of all of them that I lust after, that's the one that at least pops into my mind first, where if I could find one, I'd really like to play with one. The other bit that comes up is the Brescia Spadona, and I've heard really nice things about this sword and how it moves. I don't recall handling one, but at the same time, I've talked to people who have. People seem to really like it. It seems to be a popular one, and so it's one that I would also like to play with a little bit. I was impressed by the museum line, and I'm wondering if I play with a different iteration from the museum line, would I be equally impressed? All right, sword friends, that is the extent of my musings and ramblings. I have talked about what I've worked with, what I've owned, what I've handled a little bit, what I lust after personally, and hopefully it's given you some idea, at least if you're one of those people that ask my opinion about which Albions have you liked and why. Hopefully that gives you some idea of what to expect. And if you own Albions, I'd really be curious from your perspective, what do you like? What is your top list? Why did you part with one? What didn't you like? What did you like and why? But anyway, I would also encourage you to show up at shows, events where Albion might be present. If you're near their shop in Wisconsin, go visit it. If you have a HEMA club local to you and somebody owns an Albion, go up and ask them if you can hold it. Don't swing it at a metal pole or do dumb things with it, but hold it, and any of that first-hand experience is going to be better at helping you to determine if you like the sword or not than at least this video will. But for those of you that wanted my opinions on Albions and wanted a brain dump of information from somebody that doesn't do HEMA or anything like that, here it is. Hopefully it was helpful. Cheers, and thanks for watching.